The title of this episode is The New World. Well, at this time in history, it was somewhat new, at least, to the Europeans. To really understand how we ended up in the Caribbean and the Americas, we have to travel back further in time to the Age of Discovery, or the Age of Exploration. The timing is a bit broad, but officially began in the early 15th century, and lasted through the 17th century. This is about to sound fucked up, but this is around the time Caucasians discovered spices. This shit was all the rage, Asia was booming, spices and silks were the must-haves. And the queens and kings, princesses and princes just had to have it. At the time in question, trades between Europe and Asia took place on land, via the Silk Road, and the journey was often long, expensive, and not to mention dangerous. I forgot to mention the members of this Game of Thrones. The king in the north was Henry VII of England, rivaled by King Ferdinand II of Aragon, and Queen Isabella of Castile, the monarchs of Spain. In France we had Charles VIII, in Portugal John II, and for the Dutch, well, at this specific time in history the Netherlands didn't exist. But they are important to this story, so we have to add them to the conversation. And, yes, I acknowledge that I made a corny Game of Thrones reference. So now that's out of the way, we can move on. Please note that I listed the ruling monarchs in the year 1492, because that's the year, air quotes, the New World was discovered. But as we progress throughout the time periods, I will give you the names of the head shit caller for each country as they become of importance. I just remembered something. We got to go back a little further in history. And we have to go over to Portugal. For all this to make sense, we have to look at Henry, and not Henry VII. Apparently there was a name shortage in those days, because we had many different versions of Henry, and he also came in different nationalities. The Henry that we are most concerned about is Dom Henrique of Portugal, Duke of Viseu, better known as Prince Henry the Navigator. Although Prince Henry the Navigator was neither a sailor nor a navigator, he sponsored a great deal of exploration along the west coast of Africa. Under his patronage, Portuguese crews founded the country's first colonies and visited regions previously unknown to Europeans. Henry is regarded as an originator of the Age of Discovery, and the Atlantic enslaved people trade. So this Henry was not only responsible for the beginning of curious Europeans, but this motherfucker started slavery as we know it today. Oh, it might also be worth mentioning that mixed in with the slavery, he also had a deep-seated hatred for anyone that wasn't a devout Christian, particularly Muslims. This hatred led to, in 1415, the Portuguese attacked the rich Muslim city of Ceuta in North Africa, in a renewal of Christian-Muslim hostilities. Prior to this, myths and superstitions kept explorers from venturing further than what they were accustomed to. Over the years following, other noteworthy Portuguese explorers contributed to what Henry started, Vasco da Gama being one of the more famous ones. Next up we have the Spaniards. If envy and jealousy isn't some of the greatest motivational tools, then I don't know what is. Because that's exactly what happened with Spain. Spain started to take note of Portugal's expanding empire and decided they wanted skin in the game. Whatever Christopher Columbus was, an asshole, he knew how to get his way. He used Portugal's success in North Africa to manipulate King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella into sponsoring his voyage to the New World. Sidebar, it was brought to my attention that I've been very offensive to Christopher Columbus. And that I should be an unbiased narrator of history. So for those that I've offended, I sincerely don't give a fuck. Back to history. Columbus first arrived to the New World in 1492, he believed that he had sailed to the Indies, as Asia was then known. At the time, Europeans did not realize that this was a completely new part of the world that we now call the Americas. It is also for this reason that people who lived in this part of the world before the Europeans arrived have been called Indians. The Spanish settled Bahamas, Cuba, Jamaica, and Hispaniola to name a few. Fun fact: even though Columbus is the most popular of the explorers from that time, a less-known figure got the namesake of the landmasses we now know as the Americas. His name is Amerigo Vespucci. Vespucci participated in at least 2 voyages of the Age of Discovery, first on behalf of Spain, 1499 to 1500, and then for Portugal, 1501 to 1502. Remember what I said earlier about envy and jealousy being some of the greatest motivational tools? Well, it continued to be the driving factor behind colonization. Because the English got to hating, and decided they also weren't going to be left in Europe twiddling their thumbs. Sir Thomas Warner was the man for the job. For much of the 16th century, Spain had things pretty much its own way in the region. The English settled St. Kitts in 1624, Barbados, Montserrat and Antigua in 1627, and Nevis in 1628. Around the same time, we're going to have to hold off on the rest. We're going to have to split it into two parts. Our research shows that the attention span these days is around 6 minutes. So I don't want to bore you. So this episode is to be continued. Join us for part 2 for the continuation throughout time with prehistoric.